Hello, welcome again, and thank you for watching this video, which begins with a relatively brief statement on taxes. The tax laws in this country, meaning the United States, have been written to create a burden for the average working family that is inequitable to the extreme when compared to the relatively small burden that's placed on the extremely wealthy, who own, control, or greatly profit from the holdings and profits of the corporate and industrial world, and on the corporate structure. I do not include real and true small businesses here, and I make that distinction because some of the largest businesses in the world qualify under the current legal definition to be classified as small businesses, but of course they are not. Don't misunderstand. All should pay their fair share of taxes, including the average working families. But note that I said fair share. I'm not trying to say that the dollar amount or even the burden should be equal for everyone. I know that's not reasonable. But it could be a great deal more equitable than it is today. The great wealth that is made in the United States and elsewhere each year through capital gains, with the possible exception of the gains received from the sale of one's private home in which we reside, those gains should and must be taxed at the same rate as income from physical labor. Corporate welfare and tax loopholes for the large corporations and the very wealthy who own, control, and or greatly profit from these corporations must be stopped. Lobbying for any purpose that favors personal private interests, business, or corporate interests, or lobbying that doesn't directly benefit large segments of the population such as seniors or children or minorities or those physically or mentally challenged, or for the majority of the people such as seniors and so forth, must be very strictly and totally prohibited. Just saying, however, that such lobbying helps those mentioned in the last statement as large segments of the population, etc., does not make it so. In other words, you need to be able to prove that the legislation and the tax help is for everyone in the population in that segment of our group of the population. There may be selfish interests that will profess that their lobbying is for the right purposes as outlined, but upon investigation it may be found to be otherwise. Just taking the word of someone should not be acceptable. The fact that it helps those mentioned as in need, etc., should be more than reasonably verifiable, both initially and over time. Excuse me. Many of you have been convinced that most or perhaps even all of the taxes you pay should not be charged to you in the first place, and I'll agree that there are some bureaucracies that are ineffective, and some that are unnecessary, and those need to be streamlined in some cases and eliminated in other cases, as it may be found to be appropriate. However, Hurricane Katrina and numerous other situations, including the 2011, 2012, and 2013 tornadoes that caused such horrific loss of life and property, have let us all know in no uncertain terms just how indispensable the government, especially the federal government, really is, despite what many people are trying to tell you. Education, law enforcement, civil rights, our national infrastructure, and defense are only part of an almost endless list of very important societal needs that government must provide. Excuse me. Upcoming needs for Medicare, Medicaid, the Affordable Care Act, and other social programs, including Social Security, need to be addressed before the baby boom generation and its coming impact are more fully upon us. Privatizing Social Security or other such programs is not the answer. Getting rid of or making ineffective our government is also not the answer. That would be a disaster. Perhaps those who say that the government is the problem and would prefer that there would be no federal government would then prefer that we just dissolve the federal government altogether and have 50 separate countries instead of 50 states. Then each state could have its own army, they could handle their own disasters, make wars on other countries and other states, and it would logically follow that they would also believe that this would solve everything. Any thinking person can see how ridiculous this would be. There must be a strong, effective federal government, and those who believe otherwise either haven't thought it through, have been misled, or for other reasons don't understand. Or there may be a few of those who have their own selfish motives, such as much of the corporate structure and those who are heavily invested in its success, not wanting a strong federal government that would keep them from running roughshod over the average working family, as is too often the case today. Excuse me. All of you who do understand the situation know also that our educational system needs help. And at the time of this speaking, in 2013, 2014, 2015, we still have millions of people without adequate health care, and a powerful few who are doing their best to see that laws already passed to help provide that needed health care don't get implemented. And then now that it has been implemented, they want to try to get rid of it. If many of those who ran for office in 2010 have their way, the health care legislation would be repealed before it ever began its full coverage. Or would have been repealed before it ever began its full coverage, and there will be no health care. There wouldn't be for so very many who desperately need it. There are so many who cry that there must be tax cuts, and others who say that they've been taxed enough already, when in fact federal income taxes in 2013, 2014, 2015 are lower than they've been for many people in 50 or 60 years. The media have been very cooperative with those people calling for lower taxes, and as a result, with the media's help, the unnecessary hue and cry for lower taxes still continues. Why tie the hands of those responsible for such programs by cutting taxes that are required for all of the needs listed above and countless more? Especially when the vast majority of the tax cuts are giving the most benefit to those who need it least, the extremely wealthy. Be willing to pay your fair share of taxes and insist that others, especially those I have pointed out here, the ultra wealthy and very, very affluent, do the same. In addition, you must insist that the politicians use those tax dollars for the high priorities that must be given to education, social programs such as health care and Social Security, and to infrastructure, among other needs. The amount that most working families might receive from a tax cut will be more than taken away by increasing costs of health care, education, food, gasoline, heating, and other fuels, and countless other things that leave the average working family very little to live on. Flood the lawmakers with your demands until they stop talking about doing something and actually do it. Shouldn't we all be willing to pay our fair and equitable share of taxes? That would be even more true if we receive for those taxes, as we should, free or very reasonably priced health care for everyone, free quality education through college for our children, and honest politicians who care more about us than about the lobbyists representing business or other private interests, who pay for the politicians' vacations and fill their coffers, and who, as lobbyists, must be prohibited by law. Elections and the debates that precede them must be publicly financed and open to all who meet the basic requirements of the office they seek. These are changes that we as a people must insist upon from our legislators and political leaders at all levels of government. Many of those in power, especially those on the far right, keep talking about the deficit, and the debt that the country owes. And they, instead of being willing to pass taxes and tax increases, not taking everybody's money, but to pass reasonable tax increases for those who can afford it in order to pay that debt, never enters their mind. They want to take away the programs of those who are most in need and leave those others who have no needs that are not taken care of by their finances, or at least no financial needs that are not taken care of by their income, untouched, pretty much. That's all I'll say about that for now. Let's talk a little while on national defense. I'm not going to make any pretense that I'm an expert on national defense, so what I have to say will not be lengthy. However, the length of what I say should not be taken as an indicator that is not accurate or that is not worthwhile or not important. Given the current state of the world, our country must have a strong national defense. There should be no question about that. We must remember, however, that President Eisenhower, as he was leaving office, warned us to be wary of that which he described as the military-industrial complex. You need to be made aware that there are those in this world who have a vested interest in selling arms, ammunition, and related materials for use in war. Some of those people are not above instigating conflict anywhere in the world in order to create, restart, or otherwise bring about conditions of war so that they can then sell and profit from the selling of weapons of war of every size and description to one side or the other, and if possible, as it happens sometimes, to both sides. In addition, there are those of the same or similar low level of character who are happy to create any opportunity, including the overthrow of governments, in order to give access to that government's country to corporate conglomerates who are always seeking ever-expanding markets for their goods and services. So-called foreign aid as given to some countries is given with the condition that much or all of the aid must be spent to purchase weapons of war from American corporations. We must also not forget, however, that we should never take our safety for granted, because from time to time there are still those today who may present a danger, including those we have deemed as terrorists, who would destroy innocent lives if given the opportunity to do so. We must be on guard against such persons and groups and continue to seek the terrorists out and take away their ability to harm us. Be aware also, however, that there are policy decisions that could be made by the leadership of the United States government that would greatly reduce the threat in many ways from terrorists and from the conditions that tend to create the terrorist mentality. Knowledgeable people of wisdom in such matters should come together and put great pressure on our leaders in government and on leaders around the world to make the policy changes that would help bring about the desired reduction in the threat from terrorists. I must say also, however, that we should in no way diminish our vigilance regarding the threat from terrorists and from other sources. We should not take that danger lightly. But in my opinion, it's very unlikely that we need a defense budget that has too often been greater than the combined defense budgets of all the other industrialized countries combined. All the other industrialized countries in the world put together. I must say also that such danger does not in any way justify the wide excesses that have been given to those in the government to spy on anyone, even an innocent citizen who disagrees with their policies, without at least the government even having to obtain approval from judges or being accountable in any way. Neither does it justify the use of physical torture or humiliation in the questioning of our enemies. There must be accountability. We're the United States of America, and it's time that we started acting like the beacon of hope and freedom that has always been a hallmark of our identity to ourselves and to the rest of the world. It was my hope that the new administration elected in 2008 and again in 2012 would understand the need to take a higher approach than was taken in these and other areas by previous administrations. There were a number of positive signs that this may have been happening, but unfortunately, as time has passed, I'm not particularly favorably impressed, largely because of the lack of progress in many of these areas and other areas of concern. Now, granted, there has been great obstruction to pretty much anything this president has tried to do, but nevertheless, there has been little progress in some of these areas. We need to know the reasons why so many of our more liberal and progressive congressmen, senators, and presidents, once in office, govern more like moderately conservative Republicans. I will speak more about that later. Excuse me. We now need to talk, however, about labor unions. Most of America's population, including some who belong to labor unions, are of the opinion that labor unions are much too large, that most of them are corrupt, and that they have outlived their usefulness. That opinion, more often than not, has been created over many years as a direct result of the efforts of the captains of industry and their representatives, as well as by those who own, control, and/or profit greatly from the success of these industries. In your mind at this moment, you must be thinking, here it comes, another conspiracy theory. Why would industry do such a thing? The answer should be apparent and will be considered in greater detail soon. It all boils down to a desire for ever greater profits. Many of us today forget how things were for working people in the early part of the last century. In the 1920s, the first 30 years of the previous century, the 1900s. The heads of corporate America did not just give to workers the benefits that they have today, benefits which many of these same corporate interests are now trying to take back or rescind today. They didn't give the workers a 40-hour work week, an annual vacation, time off for illness, or even give life and health insurance. These are benefits that working people struggle with the help of labor unions and the courts to gain, while in many instances they were being attacked by gangs of industry-hired thugs who were trying to keep the workers from organizing because they knew that once the workers were able to organize themselves, the profits of industry would be somewhat reduced in order to pay benefits and better wages to their employees. Management was finally forced over a period of many years to allow the labor unions to exist, but the unions have always been a thorn in the side of management, and every effort has been made and continues to be made quite successfully lately to destroy the unions, either by damaging their reputation or by simply breaking the unions whenever they could get away with it. President Reagan set the example for industry and sent the message that it was okay to break the unions when he chose not to negotiate but instead fired all of the workers in the Air Traffic Controllers Union during his administration. Since then, the unions and the benefits, including workers' pensions for which they worked so hard over many years in order to help their member workers, have been and continue to be under assault. I'm talking about the retirement pensions are under assault. Never think for a minute that every effort is not underway to slowly take away the benefits which workers have rightfully earned and enjoyed for so many years. And on those occasions when they have been unable to destroy the unions or take their benefits away, and sometimes even when they have been able to do these things to the workers, they still ship the jobs overseas in order to take advantage of cheaper labor. Remember that every quarter the profits of a corporation must be higher than the previous quarter, and when the livelihoods of people and families are at stake, and those livelihoods suffer as a result, there's something seriously wrong with that picture. Even as these words are being written and stated to you, this process is continuing and ongoing, especially in those states where conservative governors and legislators have gained control. And if it is not stopped, workers will be set back 100 years or more. But the profits and the salaries and benefits for upper management will keep growing disproportionately, as they've been doing now for a good many years. Sadly, the efforts to destroy the unions and or to make them ineffective have had significant success, making ever greater profits for the corporate structure, and the ultra-wealthy who invest heavily in their success is always first and foremost, never the people. It's safe to assume that for the most part, I take that back, I said never the people. On some few rare occasions, there are a few corporations that do care about their people more than they do the bottom line. But they are few and far between, and they're usually under assault by the other corporate structures. Continuing now, I will say that it's safe to assume that for the most part, the corporations are not overly concerned about the ever-decreasing income of working families. In a society that's ideal, all that transpires will be for the benefit of the people, and not for the bottom line. In such a society, there will be no reason or need for labor unions. But until that time, do not underestimate the value and the contribution of the labor unions. Today's workers must still have representation, and the only way to do so in the world we now live in is for them to come together as a group and organize toward that end. I do thank you for watching. I encourage you to continue at your convenience with the next video and subsequent videos in this series. Thank you very much.